What is musical expression? To be expressive is to effectively convey meaning or feeling. Musical composers can convey through the act of organizing sound elements. For example, expression in composition can be accomplished through harmonic choices. We have an understood historical and cultural context to draw from. For a Western and surface-leveled example, we can use major harmony to convey happiness and minor for melancholy. And harmonic progressions can indicate a sentiment by telling a story. Timbre and texture can be utilized to express as well. Musical performers are the interpreter of this composed music. In real time, live performers can be expressive through the act of adding nuance to available pieces. This nuance is like a language that is shared between the performer and the listener. The understanding of these conventional signifiers will allow performers to use expressive-related cues and for the listener to hear and decode what the performer is expressing. These nuances can include subtle control over tempo, sound level, timing, intonation, articulation, timbre, vibrato, tone attacks, tone decays, and pauses. And these are sometimes implemented on many levels simultaneously. A vibrato in a violin sound, which is rarely noted on sheet music, is a simultaneous modulation of pitch, loudness, and timbre, with these multiple modulations themselves being shaped by the performer. Musicians bring their own personal response to an existing piece, whether it's a classical repertoire or jazz standards, and make real-time choices to create variations that define the expressiveness of the performance. Let's have a listen to Beethoven's Symphony No. 5 and hear variations of that famous opening motif. And for the sake of this video, let's just accept that motif is about death. So this variation is faster than the speed we typically hear it in. Perhaps death is expressed as something sudden and relentless. Okay, let's listen to another variation. This one is slower. The heavy weight of death is perhaps expressed in his performance. So as we can hear, just varying the timing can dramatically change how we perceive the expression of the music. And of course, there are many other sonic parameters that can be varied while performing this motif. An example can be a violinist playing with slower takt time. Also, they could perhaps perform with a much darker timbre. And they could play a slow and deep vibrato on the last note. Much like varying the timing, these musical choices will also change how the theme of death is expressed. Violin and other orchestral instruments enable performers to have a vast range of expression. So how do we design a new electronic instrument that enables such expression? Electronic musical instrument maps control data to a sound parameter. For example, we can use a ribbon sensor to detect where a finger is placed, and that data will determine the pitch of a synthesizer. So can we just slap on a bunch of sensors on a piece of wood and call it a day? Well, not quite. Just because we have a finely calibrated instrument with robust sensors, it's not a guarantee that an expressive performance will be accomplished by it. One-to-one mapping of a single input to a specific sonic parameter is indeed effective for transparency as well as repeatability. It's clear for the performer and the audience that a finger movement is controlling the pitch, and we can easily repeat a certain melody many times over. But in order to achieve the subtle details of expressive performance, we also require a more complex mapping. Now, this doesn't mean creating an interface that can detect a gesture and continuously and simultaneously output many control data at once. This will actually result in an increased difficulty in reliably reproducing a gesture during a performance. For example, a motion capture system in which a single performer wearing a standard set of 30 markers with 3 coordinates per marker produces a stream of 90 simultaneous continuous parameters available for musical control. This profusion of control data presents a challenge of the limitations of awareness for the performer. So complexity in design will not necessarily create an expressive instrument. We want to design something that is intuitive but not overwhelming. A small amount of control data is actually enough for the performer to have intuitive yet complex control of sound. Instead of slapping on 5 different types of sensors, let's experiment and get the most out of 1 or 2 sensors. So we need to program a one-to-many mapping, which is where one sensor data is mapped to a combination of parameters for simultaneous and multi-dimensional control of sounds. Let's say we want to do a vibrato with the ribbon sensor. We would need to do a second and third order analysis of the input data. In addition to mapping the finger position input data to pitch, the software should be able to recognize that a vibrato is happening and map the speed and direction of change, acceleration of change, depth, and etc. to the vibrato sound parameters. For example, faster the vibrato, the synth sound will be brighter and louder. I'm thinking about making a video where we do a one-to-many mapping exercise, so please stay tuned for that. It is a designer's goal to create a new electronic instrument with the same level of subtle control over sounds as existing acoustic instruments. In addition to mapping, what are some other design considerations? Physical gesture can also affect the listener's perception of the musical expression. We expect the gesture to match the resulting sound. So if a marimba is struck by a mallet hard, then we expect it to sound loud and bright. In contrast, computer music can disconnect this gesture-to-sound relationship. An extreme example is a simple press of a button, resulting in a complex sound. Feedback is another crucial design element. Instrumentalists rely on tactile and visual information as well as sonic information. In the case of a piano, keyboardists can see and locate a specific key before playing it. And even when they're not looking at the keys while performing, they're able to keep track of their hand position by relying on the feeling of the adjacent keys. And they can physically know how hard they need to press down a key, all thanks to the resistance of the key action mechanism. In many new interfaces, there's a lack of visual and tactile feedback. Theremin is an example of this. This electronic instrument is performed by moving hands in the air. And this design resulted in an instrument that has a steep learning curve. Okay, so after implementing all of these design choices, now can our instrument be recognized as an expressive instrument? Not yet. We still need to talk about one of the biggest challenges that instrument designers face, and that is Virtuosity is the display of great technical skill. And we're not talking about who can play Flight of the Bumblebee the fastest. No, we're talking about Glenn Gould, John Coltrane, Jimi Hendrix, Jaco Pastorius, and plenty of other musicians that we can keep on naming. Now, what makes them virtuosic? The human operator, once familiar with the system, is free to perform other cognitive activities whilst operating the system. A beginner jazz improviser, for example, is caught up with the basic functionality of the instrument, so they're constantly and consciously thinking something along the lines of, can I keep up with the speed of this music? What voicing should I play for the upcoming section? What scale should I use over this harmony during my solo? And what harmony is even happening right now? They just don't have the capability to listen to other players in a deeper level and convey their feelings in a conversation that is happening on stage. For a professional improviser, on the other hand, all the basic functionality of the instrument and music theory are mostly at subconscious level. Mastery over their instrument enables them to have freedom to concentrate consciously on listening and expression. Virtuosity is the result of years and years of practice and experience of individual performers on an instrument that has centuries of technological refinement. Virtuosos are also built upon a foundation set by past musicians who developed their techniques from a large body of repertoire. So the big question now is it then naive to think that masterful performance will occur on an instrument that was designed, developed, built, composed for, and rehearsed only within the last year, or even the last few months, or weeks, or days? Vast majority of computer music performance that involves new interfaces are done by someone who had little time to explore and understand the subtleties of the instrument. And I'm guilty of it too. I finished building this thing like 2 days or even a day before a live performance. So should we just give up on achieving virtuosity with new interfaces? Well, not quite. One approach is to model new interfaces based on existing acoustic instruments. We can reduce the learning curve and will also have a larger pool of performers. For early synthesizers, such as Moog, utilizing the keyboard interface proved to be successful. And there's a reason why MIDI protocol is based on a keyboard interface as well. So we can design controllers that allow experienced performers to bring years of their expressive skills to computer music. I personally design my own instruments from the perspective of a guitar player, as you can tell. So even though I finished building this instrument few days before a performance like I mentioned earlier, the show went fine. Of course, there are challenges to this approach. For example, musicians may feel intimidated by their lack of experience working with computer music, or that they had a terrible experience working with poorly designed interface that was based on their instrument of choice. As designers, we have to make acoustic instrument-based controllers feel natural and intuitive for experienced players. And to accomplish a long-term use, these instruments need to provide rewarding complexity that encourages years of practice to develop and achieve virtuosity. With all of this being said, it's not required that a new interface need to be based on the existing instrument in order to achieve virtuosity in a relatively short amount of time. Experienced performers can quickly achieve mastery over a new instrument. Theremin virtuosa Clara Rockmore is a fantastic example. She had classical training on the violin, and she also had absolute pitch. Okay, so we made an interface that is based on an existing acoustic instrument, and/or we found an experienced performer. Have we finally created an expressive instrument? Well, almost. How do we even evaluate expression? It's difficult to evaluate an instrument's expressivity without access to repeat performances of a same piece by same artist or different artists. The issue with conferences such as NIME, which is an international conference dedicated to new musical interface design, is that they focus more on the composition or the technology. Original interpretations and expression are rare and impossible to evaluate because the piece is performed only once and the interface is too novel. In the world of classical music, this is the opposite. They put more focus on standard repertoire and value various musicians' different interpretation and expression. Of course, let's not forget that there are genres other than classical and jazz. How do we perceive and evaluate musical expression in, let's say, rock music, for example? And are there cultural differences regarding expressivity? Critical discourse is indeed valuable, but it can happen beyond classical music competitions and academia. Okay, so how should we go about evaluating and having critical discourse? One approach that was suggested is to have a set of new repertoires written. By having multiple performances of that same piece by different performers, we can analyze and evaluate the expressivity of a new interface. And I wonder if there are papers and studies done where different new interfaces are used to perform the same existing piece. Also, how do we make the discourse accessible to people outside of academia? Well, we do have the internet. The paper that I keep referencing was published in 2006. YouTube was just getting started, and social media wasn't the biggest thing in the world just yet. The internet is completely different right now compared to back then. Even NIME itself is going online now. It used to be held at places around the world. So we can leverage the power of the internet to have public discourse about critiquing instrument designs. I do have an idea in mind on what we could do on this channel, and I'm actually super excited about it. Though it'll take a little while before I can share this idea. Until then, we can continue to learn more about interface design concepts in order to have a critical discourse that is fruitful. So, I'll do my absolute best to read a bunch of NIME papers and make the information digestible via video essays like this. And in order to have plenty of participation in the discourse, we need more people designing their own instrument. So go out there and start building. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this video will help you design a new instrument.